Breaking news from the hockey world. The Ottawa Senators announcing DJ Smith as their new head coach. He gets a 3-year deal and replaces Guy Boucher, who was fired back in March. Let's bring in Hockey Central Insider Chris Johnston to help break down the new hire. Chris, he wasn't the most appealing name on the list that had a guy like Patrick Waugh, Jacques Martin, other NHL caliber coaches, but DJ Smith is the guy. What kind of coach are the Sens getting in Smith?
Well, I think what's really important for Ottawa is that DJ Smith is widely viewed as a coach of the future. He's just 42 years old. And so, yeah, he's not maybe the biggest name among those that were interviewed during this process by Pierre Dorion. But I think it makes a lot of sense given his track record as an excellent communicator, someone who I think will work well with young players, and also someone that during his time in Toronto was tasked primarily with handling defensive responsibilities. And when you look at Thomas Chabot of the Sens, Eric Brandstrom, those are probably their top young players / prospects. I mean, to bring in someone with a defensive set of skills and focus makes a lot of sense to me. So DJ wasn't the biggest name, but I do think that he could become an excellent hire for Ottawa, just given his unique skill set.
You mentioned his presence with young players, and going back to his days as the Oshawa coach, that's what a lot of his players would say there as well. How important is it to get a guy like that with a team like this that's expected to struggle on the ice for a couple seasons?
Well, you want a coach, I think, ideally that grows with your group. And when he's taking over an Ottawa team that finished last in the standings, they incorporated a lot of young guys. I think you'll continue to see that into next season. DJ's first behind the bench. And so, I do think that the fact that he's a communicator too, sort of a new age coach, maybe less of a disciplinarian, sort of intimidating kind of presence, and more someone who can reach the young players is another benefit to his hiring. I mean, really what won him this position is the interviews he had with Pierre Dorion. He really blew them away in that process, and I think he'll do the same once he gets behind closed doors with his new team. And having a chance to connect with those young players and bring them along will be key to whether this looks like a good hire and whether the Sens will have some success in the years to come.
You mentioned, obviously, the interviews with Pierre Dorion, the general manager. How much was Eugene Melnicks involved with the decision to get Smith behind the bench?
I think this was largely driven from management. Eugene, from my understanding, wasn't too heavily involved. But, it's worth noting here as well that when Guy Boucher was hired 3 years ago, the Sens had hoped to speak to DJ Smith. And at that time, the Leafs didn't allow it. He'd only had one season as an assistant at that point under Mike Babcock. And so they didn't get a chance to speak with him then. Obviously now 4 years in total as Babcock's assistant, there is a shelf life, I think, to an assistant coaching staff. You want some fresh blood in there, and the Leafs granted that permission. And from all accounts, DJ did an excellent job in those interviews with the Senators.
Well, shortly after the DJ Smith news announced, the Leafs announcing some news of their own with regarding their staff. Paul McFarland hired as an assistant, Jim Hiller along with Smith, both gone behind Mike Babcock's bench. A little bit about McFarland, who comes over from the Florida Panthers, CJ.
Well, it's ironically enough, some of his success in the past was with DJ Smith back with the Ottawa Generals. He was an assistant with them there, went on and coached the Kingston Frontenacs in the OHL, and then spent 3 years with the Florida Panthers. He was primarily a power play guy with Florida, and they had an excellent one last season. I think he's more than a replacement for Jim Hiller, who was the Leafs power play guy who's now seeking other opportunities. And there was some discussion after the season in Toronto. Would Mike Babcock return? I think we're seeing almost a compromise measure here, that they're still changing within that coaching staff, obviously with Babcock still at the helm here. And, with DJ Smith departing his role in the defensive responsibilities, Toronto will still have one more position to fill. But, Paul McFarland's young blood, a guy in his 30s and has a track record with the Panthers power play. And, I think another coach of the future. If you look at Mike Babcock's past, whether it's Todd McClellan, Jeff Blashill, he's worked with a number of guys over the years that were his assistant on his staff, went on to head coaching jobs elsewhere. I think that's probably the role that Paul McFarland fashions himself in, going to the school of Mike Babcock and bring a skill set to the Leafs bench. But, at some point down the road, we'll probably be talking about him in line for one of these head coaching positions in the NHL.
And right now we are talking about DJ Smith going to the other side of the Battle of Ontario, from Toronto to the new head coach of the Ottawa Senators. Thanks for this, CJ.
Thank you, Faizal.